Von Dutch was once an unignorable brand in the media. In the early 2000s, swathes of beautiful women like Paris Hilton, Britney Spears, and Justin Timberlake were seen in their clothes and accessories. But yet, all of their influence can only be tied down to a few years of virality, ended in its prime due to a very public expose. The history of Von Dutch begins in September 1992 when a man by the name of Von Dutch died. He'd been a car mechanic and detailer that was famous in the 1950s and 60s, whose legacy by this point was largely forgotten, save for a few loyal fans, including one Ed Boswell, who had been a fan of Von Dutch's work and decided to buy the licensing rights to the Von Dutch name from his daughters Lisa and Lorna, just in order to sell patches at his 1993 Laguna Art Museum show named Custom Culture. Now, this is actually a very important point, as it takes the original idea of Von Dutch's artistic works and puts them into a removed context for a partially different consumer market. Within the scene, Von Dutch was a well-respected detailer, but his political beliefs were well-known and seemingly forgiven by those in that automobile industry, just they weren't known to the wider public. To give you some initial context for this, here's a slightly long quote from a series of interviews with Von Dutch's friends. Quote, "He was quite a racist, didn't like anybody. He had all the trappings of being a neo-Nazi. He could not tolerate black people," said Williams, whose friendship with Dutch cooled over time but never ended. "But I had some wonderful times with him. When you caught him in a good mood, he was really wonderful to talk to. But he would slip into these loud, violent periods that were just horrible." In the late 1960s, Dutch, allegedly driving drunk, wrecked a car carrying his then pregnant wife. She lost the baby, and Dutch wound up living in various places in Arizona for several years to avoid persecution for manslaughter. He was tremendously talented, Brooker remembers, but he would drink and it was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He'd be a nice guy in the morning, and then in the afternoon he would drink and it was like a split personality or something. A letter written not too long before his death in 1992, when he was in the hospital and heavily medicated, reportedly closed with Heil Hitler. Somehow, inevitably, this helped make Dutch cool. When he died, he was on the verge of a mass rediscovery by Generation Xers, who found a palatable, nonconformist conformity in the cult of the flying eyeball. So within the scene, this was his legacy. It's just all of these things were not known outside of people who were in love with the detailing and/or automobile industries. This is important as come a year or so later, I believe in 1995, Ed Boswell met Michael Castle and Robert Bobby Vaughan at a trade show. We do not know how much Vaughan and Castle knew about Von Dutch's persona, his life, but at the time, both men were looking to invest in any new surfscape business after seeing pretty notable success with their previous brand, Bronze Age. The only trouble was that they'd not been successful in their search for some time due to their own seedy pasts. Castle had been a former drug dealer who served 4 years in San Quentin State Prison after a cocaine bust, and Bobby was a competitive surfer and model who'd recently evaded arrest after his involvement in a 1993 shooting that I think may have killed his cousin. So it was a risky venture, but they had the background that Bowell needed if he wanted to turn his idea into something more substantial. In the end, this is why Bowell, Castle, and Vaughan decided to go into business together, printing the Von Dutch motifs onto clothes. They all had something that the other lacked. However, it seems it was on their history that the licensing rights were then sold instead to Michael Castle, passing over Bowell to establish Von Dutch originals. The idea that it wasn't continued through Bowell would soon become a great point of disagreement. Nevertheless, at the time, they achieved their production in the same method as Bronze Age, by making screen-printed trucker hats, t-shirts, and Dickies jeans that they just unpicked the label from and attached a Von Dutch label to, and printed on top of them. They have all individually claimed ownership of the general idea in the press, but in reality, it wasn't any of these people's ideas to put his work onto clothes. Dutch had directly detailed onto clothing within his lifetime. There are literally pictures of it here from the 2014 book, Von Dutch, The Art, the Myth, the Legend. So they're all lying, and the only difference between before and after the partnership is that Castle and Vaughan simply had the money and the expertise to make it happen. It did, however, soon see Boswell forced out of the company because, unlike Boswell, Castle and Vaughan openly did not care for the integrity or the artistic merit of the business. Quote, "Everything cool gets packaged and sold to somebody," Castle said. "If I make some money out of it and his daughters make some money out of it, I think that's the American way. If somebody does that to me after I die, I'd be honored." Much has been made of this quote, with Von Dutch's friends actually being quite angry about it, in a way that makes it seem like Dutch himself was vehemently anti-capitalist and that he would have hated what had become of his brand, though those aren't directly terms used. Because, effectively, this quote was Castle openly admitting that they didn't care whose art it was, just that they could use his art to make money. And this is what they attempted to do. In between 1996 and 1999, the boys sought capital, finding it notably difficult as no traditional venture capitalist or even bank would back the venture thanks to the founder's criminal background. So instead, they actually needed to look for an angel investor. In the meantime, the label had built up a small but loyal following amongst teenagers in LA who simply did not know the history of the name whatsoever. But they were just trying to look cool by association because they liked the art style. Quote, "Kids go through a stage where they like punk rock, they like rebellious things, and that anarchy, right? He was that in his art. He was that in his actions. He was completely against the grain." It would continue to be important that the brand was targeted away from Von Dutch's original fan base friendship group, as this effectively is what gave them a market. Young people who were trying to look cool by association, who didn't really know who Von Dutch was or even that he was a person. By 1999, they finally found their long-awaited angel investor in the form of Ueno Shokai Company Limited, who put in $475,000 and seemed to really have a hands-off approach, and, much more notably, in Tony Sorensen, who was a former Olympic Taekwondo fighter that would join the company, but notably, he seemed to join Von Dutch Originals, which is now the company name, partially because he didn't do any due diligence, by which I mean he was known for making 1-second flash decisions on investments. This, however, should also be taken with a pinch of salt, as accounts do vary wildly on how he made his decision, with some noting that Sorensen had been making a documentary on Von Dutch before he even met Castle. In either situation, it's not a massively positive way that Sorensen joined the business. On one hand, he did no due diligence, deciding on it in a flash, and on the other, he was knowingly making a clothing brand based on the legacy of a neo-Nazi. So either way, it's not a great introduction, whichever story is historically correct. Of course, finding out which one is historically correct may be impossible today, as remember, this was the 1900s. So much of that information has been lost to time. Don't forget, this was the same century as the horse and buggy. Nevertheless, Sorensen ended up being a huge positive force on the brand, actually. When he became CEO in 2000, he hired Christian Audiger to become the creative director and would use his own celebrity influence to introduce the brand to his celebrity friends. This, in fact, is how the brand had their first major breakthrough when Tommy Lee wore a Von Dutch t-shirt on his October 25th, 2000 episode of MTV Cribs. This ended up being a huge push in visibility for the brand. It had a knock-on effect on sales, and Sorensen basically saw the successful writing on the wall. But by 2001, the brand was still in $600,000 of debt. Vaughan decided it was now time to leave the brand and instead received the exclusive license for his new firm, VD Customs, to manufacture all Von Dutch products except for denim. However, allegedly behind his back, Sorensen then bought out the other minor investor, Ueno Shokai Company Limited, and ended up with 51% of the company, effectively forcing all of the other initial founders out of the venture when he then terminated the agreed manufacturing license with VD Customs to create a totally second contract that was much more lenient to Von Dutch LLC in working with other factories. Sorensen then repositioned Von Dutch as a luxury brand, one of the first streetwear brands to sell on brand equity alone, in fact. Quote, Sorensen saw potential to sell the trucker hats at a luxury price point, even selling leather styles for as high as $85, and he was clearly onto something. The first drop they launched in-store instantly sold out. People didn't know what Von Dutch meant, says Dennis Rodman, a noted Von Dutch fan in the 2000s. They just wanted to wear it. But it wasn't only because of scarcity marketing. So far, with Tommy Lee in October 2000 and a placement on Pamela Anderson around the same time, they'd seen these huge spikes in interest and thereby sales. It was an avenue that they were very interested in pursuing, but Sorensen's connections were limited. Enter Tracy Mills. Tracy at this time was literally no one. Born September 14th, 1973, he was about 27 years old in 2001. And from what I can tell, he just had no discernible career before this. His only value to the company was the fact that he knew a bunch of celebrities. The only thing that he has said in interviews is that his brother was in the NFL. So that's as close as I can find. In fact, even his LinkedIn starts at Von Dutch in June 2001. Nevertheless, he would be seminal to the growth of the brand because of his connections. Quote, after discovering Von Dutch in 2002 through his friend Brian Prescott, who's now a manager to Jamie Foxx, Mills' desire to find unique clothing soon turned into a life-changing trajectory. I went down into the store and fell in love with the brand, but no one in our culture, or really anyone at the time, really knew about the brand. I started going down there often because I wanted to have what no one else had, so I was heavy on Von Dutch because no one else had it, Mills explains. Eventually, a lot of my friends who happened to be celebrities started asking me where I was getting the clothes from, so I started taking them there. Like Hilary Duff, Lindsay Lohan, Usher, Brandy, Bow Wow, and Puff Diddy, he reveals. His frequency in the store didn't go unnoticed. The head designer, Christian Audiger, said to his friends, next time he comes into the store, bring him to me. So when I did, he offered me a job on the spot and I took it. So while it was Audiger who made the clothes desirable for a wider niche, it was actually Mills and Mills's connections that was responsible for bringing Von Dutch to celebrities. This had been Sorensen's plan since he took over the brand. They'd long had a policy of never charging a celebrity for any item at all, and it's this that led to situations like, the 50 bags Paris Hilton, whose ancestor had a part in popularizing the skateboard, by the way, I'm doing a members-only video about it, claimed she walked out with, became her uniform to The Simple Life, which launched in 2002, and history was made by it. Soon the brand absolved their debts and began doubling its profits every month to the tune of $6 million in 2002. However, by that autumn, Castle filed a lawsuit alleging that Sorensen had misrepresented an investors agreement and illegally claimed all the rights to Von Dutch. This had been a hostile takeover, yes, and Castle had felt taken advantage of, hence the lawsuit. By June 2003, Vaughn too had filed 2 cases, firstly claiming a breach of fair dealing with Michael Castle that was settled the following month in July, and secondly claiming that Sorensen had conducted unfair business practices, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and breach of fair dealings as well. But this one took longer to solve. In the meantime, the brand expanded into 3 stores in California, multiple retail partnerships across America, and was considered one of the hottest brands in the world, thanks in large part to the endless endorsement of Paris Hilton and Nicole Richie on their ridiculously successful TV show. But let's go back to the court litigation, because in February 2004, Sorensen's lawsuit with Castle settled out of court for an undisclosed sum quietly, and by June, his lawsuit with Vaughn came to a similar fate. And yet that was the least of their troubles. Firstly, copyists flooded the market, and there was no real brand heritage value to be had outside of hype products to retain customers to the original product, remembering that this had been targeted towards a consumer group that were not original fans of the Von Dutch person. Secondly, this caused a huge oversaturation of Von Dutch in the public, outside of the early adopters, making it just seem lame. This is something that Paris Hilton said caused her to dispose of her entire collection in the 2021 documentary. She wasn't under contract, it was just gifted products, so this was just easy to dispose of for her. Thirdly, the brand had grown a reputation for being popular amongst an undesirable group of people, which is what gave it the colloquial name of Von Douche, because the current adopters were basically just douchebags. Fourth, both Audiger and Mills left to go and work on the Ed Hardy brand, which similarly commercialized on an artist's work by putting them on t-shirts and jeans, then using celebrity proximity to drive desirability, but which would quickly take over as the next hype brand from Von Dutch, stealing a very large part of their consumer base. Finally, fifth, and very much most importantly, came the founders' fight. So, I told you about Castle and Vaughan suing Sorensen before, but what of the art collector Ed Boswell? Well, still bitter towards the company for being successful after he was bought out by Castle and Vaughan, before the two investments entirely, he had nothing to do with Sorensen, Boswell ended up leaking a letter written by Von Dutch in 1992, which is that letter I told you about all the way back in the beginning of the video that contained several racist, anti-Semitic remarks, professed an admiration for Nazi Germany, and he signed off Heil Hitler. Story after story ran about the racist, anti-Semitic name of the company, and the media had a field day with the information. Of course, the founder had absolutely nothing to do with the company, and Von Dutch LLC really desperately tried to push that, distancing themselves from the only value that they could actually provide, but it didn't matter. The actual founders knew that he was a bigoted person and still tried to memorialize his name in this way anyway. So even if it had nothing to do with him, why are they promoting a person that had all of these beliefs? Pretty soon, Von Dutch's actual friends started speaking out about how he would have hated the brand as it was today and how it was entirely a poser brand. Quote, "The most solid I've ever heard anybody's name," said Burbank automotive artist Keith Wiesner. "If Von Dutch only knew, oh, he'd kill M," said Scratch, who builds and paints 50s-style hot rods and custom cars. "To know that a Russian Jew stole the name from his daughter, he'd flip. Oh yeah, full on." The company was dead in the water basically overnight. It wasn't cool, it was aligned with a Nazi, was overexposed. There was just no redeeming factor. 5 years passed. Sorensen sold the company to Group Royer in 2009. They split the products, distribution, and presentation geographically, running the company pretty much totally separately under totally different branding depending on the location, and attempted several comebacks in various territories, none of which majorly took off. Though the most successful does seem to be Indonesia, where it's closely linked to motocross. I'm not sure how widely successful it is. Another 7 years pass. And finally, in this time seems to have healed the wound of the scandal. It helps us forget, helps us get nostalgic even, about how Chikorita is in fact the best Pokemon ever designed. And slowly but surely, things like Juicy Couture, Baby Fat, and Von Dutch become vintage and therefore nostalgic once again. By 2016, enough time had passed that Kylie Jenner was able to wear a Von Dutch hat mid-King Kylie era to no backlash whatsoever. Then came 2018 when Travis Scott also wore Von Dutch while he was out on tour to no scandal at all. And because celebrity endorsements still carried heft, Group Royer decided it was now time to capitalize on this renewed interest, especially because neither of them had seen any pushback. They did this basically by finding a Tracy Mills 2.0 in someone named Ed Goldman, who joined basically doing the same thing in a consulting position. He was effectively tasked with getting the brand on as many celebrities, specifically people in black music scenes, as possible. And he actually did a pretty good job. He had Saweetie, Quavo, Megan V, list goes on. It even expanded into Y2K fashion spaces by the 2021-2022 years, with Bella Hadid, Emma Chamberlain, and Addison Rae spotted in their clothes. The brand introduced Von Dutch Paris as a higher tier line in November 2022, and basically immediately started scouting for buyers for the whole company. Effectively, all of this was an effort to get an early out. They wanted rid of the business. This brings us to July 2024, when they finally achieved that goal. Following a low-key kind of lucky boost to searches thanks to Charlie XCX, WSG bought Von Dutch for an undisclosed amount and put out a joint statement about the acquisition from their CEO, Jack Chaika, and COO Mark Benitez, in which they seemed to totally miss the mark about what Von Dutch was. Quote, "We're excited to channel Von Dutch's storied legacy, led for several years by Group Royer and now by WSG, into innovative designs that resonate with today's fashion-forward consumers. Our vision is to make Von Dutch not just a brand, but a movement that celebrates individuality and bold expression globally." I would like to know where they see innovative design or even bold expression within their product offering, because I, for one, do not see that in the products themselves. And apparently neither do their customer base, because if we look from the data from my sponsor Particle, we can actually see that their best sellers are logo hat, logo hat, logo hat, logo bag, logo bag, logo bag, logo hat, logo bag, logo hat, logo hat. Ah, I see now. That's very innovative. I take back what I said. It's definitely people looking for artistic merit and not hangers on to celebrity culture. 100%. Guaranteed. Quote, "Charlie XCX's song Von Dutch has been a game changer during such an important time of our brand evolution. Her bold and rebellious energy and empowering Brat Summer movement perfectly encapsulates what Von Dutch stands for," Mark Benitez, Chief Operating Officer at Von Dutch, told WWD. "Her influence has bridged the gap between our loyal fans and a whole new audience discovering us for the first time. We're honored to be part of this cultural resurgence where people are not just wearing our clothes, but embodying the true spirit of Von Dutch." So obviously, this is almost identically opposite of what they were saying. Either they told us in the first quote that they were going with Von Dutch's storied legacy going into the brand history, or they're telling us that they are going into people that are hanging on to celebrity culture and they're basically just trying to push as much product onto them as quickly as they possibly can. It just ends up with a confused message that in turn looks disingenuous. It makes them seem like a brand that stands to represent nothing in particular and is solely revived for commercial gain. And actually, that's well reflected in the data. So actually, I showed you this information from the 2025 data, as they only actually returned to online sales in late 2024. They saw a bit of a Christmas peak towards the end of 2024, but really it wasn't until March 2025 that we would see the brand return to decent sales, according to the data Particle derived from various sources like online sales, inventory, pricing, assortment, and sentiment across all of e-commerce. Now, what's interesting though about this is that while the top searches are consistent with logo hats and logo bags, sales do not correlate to Google searches until late August/early September, where we can see that both sales and searches are up concurrently, which I believe to be the result of their Bershka collaboration that debuted in August 2025. This allowed basically for much wider distribution for the brand and a much inflated exposure, leading to both an increase in sales as observed by Particle and an increase in searches as seen by Google. They also created music-themed subsidiary named Von Dutch Loves in 2025, which is effectively the same thing they were doing already but geared towards the music scene. They licensed out Von Dutch to food and beverage under a new subsidiary as well, with whom they started releasing throughout the year water, seltzers, and various alcohol types. And they're also planning a collab with True Religion in November this year, but of course we don't have data for that yet. These videos are made a month in advance for Patreon. So despite that last one, these have at least continued Von Dutch to be in the public, or at least their methods of connecting with various kinds of audiences, but seemingly none of this is done in a particularly meaningful way. It's obviously all targeted towards a younger audience. They've got music, booze, and then low-priced products, so it's definitely targeting that kind of younger audience that maybe doesn't know the original legacy of the brand. And we do know this because it's all made in a licensing deal with Sea Life Group, who make a lot of screen-printed t-shirts for music artists and, things that you might pick up because they're cheap or they're for a cultural event that don't necessarily have any artistic merit, but they might have a cultural tie or a memory for somebody. In this sense, they have kind of taken Von Dutch back to their commercial origins of printing motifs onto pre-made clothing. Think about the Dickies that were some of their earliest products. But has anything actually changed? No, not really. They haven't tried to make any amends to the fact that their namesake was a neo-Nazi. The product isn't particularly good or interesting. It's even still just pushing for an audience that's too young or too naive to know anything about their brand past the mentality of, oh, it looks cool. In a sense, that's what Von Dutch is and always has been. It's empty fashion, or it's not really fashion at all. There's no artistic merit here whatsoever, and frankly, I hope there's no historical merit here too, because if there was, that would make the brand significantly worse. Essentially, Von Dutch is landfill fodder based on the assumption that their target market of consumers either don't care or don't have the wherewithal to research the brands that they're buying. Of course, this exists and there are many customers like this and there is a market for that, but it is just empty. If they continue to aim Von Dutch towards an audience that only wants it for 5 minutes of fame, that's no way really to build a brand so much as make a quick buck. This is actually something I discussed with Brett Staniland, aka Twin Brett, on Instagram, as he and his twin are known to be active in the decrying of exactly this empty fashion. He said, quote, "Brands can't survive these days without something behind them, a story, some legacy, or a person. A baseless brand means nothing to no one, and adding in the fact that they were essentially cancelled for not addressing it all is just not going to work in today's age. There's some nostalgia there, but not enough to make the brand go anywhere. It's just stuff for stuff's sake, like with the rest of landfill clothing." Essentially, this is what the original founders were doing as well. It was similar, and they had a similar fate. As soon as it was uncool, the entire brand died overnight because there was nothing behind the brand to give it value. They can literally buy exposure, but longevity must still be earned. For this reason alone, I do think that we will see a new peak in Von Dutch soon from people that are ignorant to their history. Maybe it won't be a major boost, but I think there'll be one, a shift for teens, perhaps. But do I think any of this will last? Obviously not. There's no substance to Von Dutch, and for the time being, it seems that there never will be. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please do like and subscribe. For more videos like this one, but about beauty brands, check out Underskin here, and a special thank you goes out to my patrons over on Patreon and my channel members here on YouTube for their ongoing support. All content used in this video is done so in accordance with the principles of fair use. However, if you have any concerns, please contact me directly at contact@understitch.co.uk.